Welcome to another Sunday morning conversation, everybody. Today, my guest is Dr. Stephanie Alessi-LaRosa. She is a sports neurologist out in Connecticut, and I talked to her a little bit about concussions and traumatic brain injuries and the long-term impacts of it. What you should know is I started this recording a little bit late, so the first thing I asked her is a journal article of hers that I found about twinning in concussions. And it was about where two brothers who were like 11 years old, they got concussions in a football game. They were both linebackers, and they both came into the hospital at the same time. So they did a comparison and everything. So I thought it was interesting because doing twin studies on traumatic brain injuries and concussions is not exactly ethical. You can't cause them. It's do no harm. That's what the beginning of the video is about. So we're going to jump right into that now. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
What happened was, so in our clinic, when I was in fellowship, there were, an appointment of two twin boys, identical twin boys that came in, and they essentially were in the same position in football, and played in the same game, and both had concussions by the end of the game. It was they took a series of hits that game. Nothing was really stand out, and really what happened was they both had similar symptoms, similar recovery course, and just really everything sort of lined up. But it was just by chance that they came into our clinic. So that's why we really felt compelled to write it up, because that doesn't really happen. And so it was really interesting to see how, there may be a genetic component to how people recover, what their symptom threshold is, in terms of getting symptoms and things like that. So in terms of the mechanism of injury. So it was really an interesting case.
Now, obviously, it's not a longitudinal study, which is, would be for life, but have you guys kept tabs on them at all since it's seeing?
Well, so I was in fellowship at the time, so I left the practice. I don't know if they're still being seen there. That was in a different state than where I am currently. So I have not kept tabs, but I'm not sure if the practice has. But they were high school kids. So, I'm sure if they're continuing to play football, they'll probably be back with another injury at some point, potentially. So, yeah.
And I guess that would kind of skew the data, because it's not like once you get another concussion, you obviously have now changed. You added an independent variable to the mix.
Yeah, I think, it would just be interesting, to kind of follow them throughout the rest of their high school football career for sure. So, hopefully they're allowing them to track that. So
what had got you into being a sports psychologist? I mean, not psychologist, a sports doctor particularly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm a sports neurologist, and, really I love neurology. I think the brain is obviously very fascinating. When I was in medical school, I always was drawn to the neurology patients, no matter what area of medicine I was rotating in. So I knew I had to be a neurologist. My father is a neurologist, and he had done some work ringside with boxing locally, where I grew up. And I just sort of kind of got a little bit of exposure to that. And it sort of was in the back of my mind for most of my career, in training. And then in residency, I really felt like that's what I want to do. It was a new field. Sports neurology is a very new field, relatively speaking. And I just felt like it was a good fit for me. The patients are obviously highly motivated, being athletes to return to their lives. And, they need to perform highly to be successful. So I just felt that population is really unique. I want to be the neurologist that helps them perform.
Yeah, it is. Actually, I've met a couple of ringside fight docs since I've got my TBI. And I've always asked them, I said, do you have any, I guess, ethical concerns with yourself by being a doctor and participating in an event to where they're trying to cause, they're wailing on each other's heads. Do you feel like an ethical concern about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, they definitely need doctors to keep the sport safe. And I feel like that's really my role there, is to make sure that the athletes are safe, We check them thoroughly beforehand. We check them thoroughly after the fight and everything as well. And there's, in our state of Connecticut, there's actually pretty rigorous, things that they need to have in order to fight here. So, there are other states that are not as rigorous and they're more dangerous, I would say. So I feel in my role, ringside is to keep it safe. It's not my favorite thing to watch. I'm certainly not a fan of the sport. But, if this is what they've chosen, I think we can, help them do it safely.
That would explain why major fights don't end up in Connecticut.
Probably. Yeah.
I'm going to assume that Vegas and New Jersey are a lot easier to get a boxing license and less restrictive.
Potentially.
I don't know, but I'm going to guess. But so, I mean, are you work a lot more with people who play football? Because, football is a violent sport. There is no way to make it safe. You will never have a safe helmet. The only way to not get injured in football is to not play.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I mostly do football and ice hockey and, combat sports like MMA and boxing. But I still see patients who do everything, lacrosse and, you name it, whatever. But yeah, I mean, it is a tough sport, because the brain is still sort of, vulnerable in collision sports and combat sports. The whole point of boxing is to neurologically impair the opponent. So, it makes our job difficult. But I do feel that there are a lot more benefits than risks to playing sports, especially, I don't like youth football. I don't like youth tackle. That kind of stuff doesn't really make sense. But, high school, it would be the earliest that I would say somebody could do tackle football if they really are compelled to do it. And then we really try to, again, make it as safe as possible, help them recover and make sure their brain health is good, for them to participate and get all the benefits of playing sports. I think that that's really important for kids.
So in hockey, obviously you can get a concussion in a variety of ways, either a hit, fighting. Have you seen people get a concussion from getting hit in the face with a puck? Because I know over the years, the rules have changed in regards to helmets in hockey, because long ago, you didn't have to wear one. And then people got grandfathered in at some point. So you had still people, wearing helmets, then face shields. But I mean, I don't know. I've rarely seen anybody ever get hit in the face with a puck.
Yeah, it happens. Oh yeah. And that hurts, even the puck to the helmet, puck to the face, any of that is not good. Yeah. It's coming really fast, Yeah.
So, I mean, what are some of the worst cases that you've seen that, I guess that were less concussions and more traumatic brain injury? What really is the difference between the two?
Yeah, good question. I mean, concussion is really that there's it's more of a functional disturbance rather than a structural injury. So whereas TBI and certainly severe TBI, moderate TBI usually has a structural injury to the brain, something that might show up on a CAT scan or an MRI, whereas concussion does not, but it's still a functional disturbance in the brain. So that's sort of the difference clinically. I would say, I mean, there's a lot of things that, I see that I'm worried about a severe TBI, like again, in boxing or something, if somebody's, lost consciousness in the ring, or if they start after the fight developing worst headache of their life, or, things like that, they start to become less and less responsive after a fight, you're worried about a hemorrhage in the brain. And obviously those are life threatening. So yeah, those are probably the scariest things, is what the potential is in the situation. Certainly sidelines, seeing somebody go into a seizure after a hit to the head is not pleasant to watch. But, and you're worried about that brain in that moment. But, I think in terms of things that I've witnessed, that would be the main things that I would be concerned of the most. I haven't seen anybody, in the moment suffer a severe TBI from sports, however, so far in my career, which is lucky.
Mine was kind of sort of in sports. I was riding my bike when I got hit by a car.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's not like an actual traditional sport, but I was in my
Hmm.
off-season training.
Yeah.
Um, and so I have lasting effects from mine.
Yeah.
So it is definitely, I may have had I had an unconfirmed concussion when I was like 11. I was
Hmm.
swimming, mistimed my finish, hit my head, and I don't know. I don't really remember not, but my mom is a nurse, and she's like, "You probably had a concussion."
Hmm.
So yeah, but I didn't have any lasting impacts from that. It was the
Right.
TBI, so I
Yeah.
barely remember that.
Sure.
And I don't know, like obviously it's a functional with concussions, it's
Hmm.
functional, but does it ever transition into structural? Like, say
Hmm.
how Jim McMahon is really messed up these days, as an NFL
Hmm.
quarterback.
Hmm.
I actually talked to him in an interview,
Hmm.
and I mean, I could just tell by talking to him, and he's just had several concussions. Does it
Yeah.
ever, change from being functional into structural after so many?
That's a great question. I think that's something that the research still has not told us yet or informed us of that yet. But there's a lot of theories, certainly with CTE, people being diagnosed with that after death. As their brains are examined, we're discovering there may be some structural findings on a post-mortem brain. But, there's nothing that's really said, oh, well, if you take such and such number of hits, that then you'll have personality changes, suicidal thoughts, mood disturbances, etc. And then you'll have CTE and death. We do not have that information that has made that sort of continuum there. So I feel like there's still a number of factors to somebody developing, dementias or memory problems and suicidal thoughts and personality changes. I mean, these athletes are under a lot of financial stress. Their life changes when they retire from sport. And, a lot of that can be very stressful, and getting the brain off of its usual routine as that high level athlete can cause problems. So I think there's a number of variables. I can't blame it completely on the number of head injuries that they've taken. And I try not to do that. I think that we just don't have that information.
Yeah, I feel I would like to say that personality changes can occur after the first one, even if they're just subtle. Some may be
Hmm.
worse than others, but I'd like to say, any traumatic, instance with your brain will cause some changes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it takes a psychological effect, on especially an athlete or somebody, who's used to doing, workouts every day and having this sort of level of routine. And then it's different when they're injured. Yeah. Hmm.
And then, the more you take, I would say that, obviously it's a functional injury, but that also decreases your capacity to function. So like high level athletes taking a lot
Hmm.
of concussions over, a guy who's been in the NFL for 10 years
Hmm.
has technically been
Hmm.
playing football for probably 20.
Yeah.
And, decreasing your capacity to function, which also, one, I would say it decreases your independence because you start to become more reliant on other people.
Right.
Um, and I would say venture to say, you have made your money,
Hmm.
but you might not be financially responsible because you have to depend on other people to manage it, which means you
Right.
can be taken advantage of due to being in the state you're in.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of variables, like I was saying, and but head injury, very well could be one of them. I just don't know how much of it is the weight of it.
So let me get you out of here on this one.
Hmm.
Since you told me that your dad was a neurologist, did you ever do daddy-daughter work day just to see how it was?
Oh yeah, I shadowed him quite a bit when I was in training and in medical school and in residency, and yeah, he's been a great mentor and role model for me. And his patients, loved him, and so I sort of took that old school kind of way at the bedside, and patients, seem to really still respond to that well. So I learned quite a bit from him, and it was great watching him, do what he does, and he's still practicing, which is great. So we can still work together.
What would you say is the most important lesson you've learned from him, and when did you learn it?
That's tough. There's always tons of lessons, to learn, from your father. But I think professionally, Really, I think at the ringside when I started going to events, just even to sort of shadow him before I had a medical license and was doing it on, with my full license now. But when I would go with him, I think there were just so many lessons, like where is your threshold for ending a fight, and it's stressful and it's just a lot of moving parts, and you have to be very clinical and think about the brain itself and that person's history and just so many factors when you're sitting ringside and you have that responsibility. So I think that those are probably the biggest lessons I've learned that have taken me through with my career now.
Okay, this is the last one. Has he told you anything important that he's learned from you?
Good question. I think now it's been interesting because he's able to, he'll run cases by me now, which is kind of exciting because I did a fellowship specifically in sports neurology. So he sort of, runs things by me quite a bit, and we can kind of collaborate on cases. So I think he's learned some things, in terms of, what's the latest on how to do things too. So I think it's a good relationship professionally, even that way, which I think the patients really benefit the most from it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I could say, you can't go wrong with that. Well, thanks for joining me today, Doc. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was fun. Thanks so much, Eric.
Yeah.